Okay, so we are finally going to dive into Age of Apocalypse. This is truly amazing. Guys, we have a massive storyline to cover, and don't worry, we're going to hit every single point of Age of Apocalypse. Now, when it comes to this massive crossover, you have to remember that this is coming out of Legion Quest. And just in case we do have somebody like getting into our coverage over the X-Men and they have no idea where this event came from, I'm telling you right now, it came from Legion Quest. And let me explain, because that storyline was also amazing, but it was the foundation for Age of Apocalypse. Because to Legion, he believed that thanks to Magneto just being around and always fighting against Charles Xavier, that Charles Xavier was never truly able to finish his lifelong goal, which is have mutants and humans live together in harmony. And so for Legion, he said, if I go back in time, kill off Magneto, then most likely I would bring in a brand new world, a better world where mutants and humans can live together in harmony. The problem was that for Legion, when he went back in time, he didn't kill off Magneto. He killed off Charles Xavier on accident. And so with the death of Charles Xavier, the old timeline we knew and loved went away, and a brand new timeline came into the picture, Age of Apocalypse. Now, when it came to Marvel, when they had kicked off Age of Apocalypse, they gave us X-Men Alpha. And X-Men Alpha was kind of like a way to see what this brand new world is going to be like, with Apocalypse being able to rule over North America. But shortly after we got X-Men Alpha, we then got X-Men Chronicles. And really, X-Men Chronicles lead into X-Men Alpha to kind of show us the early days of this brand new timeline before you had Apocalypse being able to rule over North America, but to also kind of get the idea of how Magneto had formed his own X-Men. And that right there is really important, because even though there's no Charles Xavier, Magneto is still around. And Magneto is a tad bit different than he is in his old timeline. But at the same time, he does form his own X-Men team as a way to carry on Charles Xavier's dream, or he tried to at least. Because in the opening pages of X-Men Chronicles #1, it's really more of the book telling us like, hey, Magneto tried at first. He went out there to say, listen, I know you humans fear us, hate us, but let me educate you guys about us so that we have the ability to live together in harmony. Mutants and humans working together. But the problem was that fear and hatred towards the mutant race just overruled everything that Magneto was trying to build up. And so sooner or later, he realized that there's going to be dark times coming for the mutant race. But he also realized that it might not be possible for mutants and humans to live together in harmony. And so he went over to Wandagore Mountain. And what he did was he built a school inside the mountains. He said, you know what? I'm going to stay away. But also, I'm going to take in a few mutants to help teach them how to use their powers, how to control their powers. And this leads into the X-Men. And so it's kind of cool because we now get our first look at Magneto's X-Men team. You have Quicksilver, you have Storm, Iceman, Jean Grey, Colossus, and the Scarlet Witch. This is the X-Men that Magneto had built off of Charles Xavier's dream. Now, we currently see them in the Killing Zone, and I kind of love that name. Like, hey, you know what? Let's not call it the Danger Room. Let's call it the Killing Zone. But the Killing Zone is just like the Danger Room, a training room for the X-Men. And for Magneto, he wants to make sure that his X-Men are truly ready to be out there in the field fighting against the forces of Apocalypse. Because for Magneto, he knows that sooner or later, Apocalypse is going to make a move, and other enemies are also going to make moves as well. He needs to get the X-Men ready for battles to come down the road. But right after you had the X-Men finish their training session, they are then confronted by their latest team member, and that would be Logan. Now, in this reality, Logan is not Wolverine. In this reality, he is Weapon X. That is his code name. And so for Logan, when he first walks out, he kind of shows us that he's going to be roughed around the edges. And honestly, it was the same thing for him in the old Marvel timeline as well, when he had first joined the X-Men, being roughed around the edges. And so in this timeline, it's the same thing. He comes into their training session and he goes berserk already. Now, here's the thing. When he goes berserk, he's going all over the place, and he almost killed Iceman in the middle of that training session. But luckily, you had Quicksilver there to grab Bobby and get him the heck away from Logan. Now, after doing that, you then had Magneto tell Jean Grey to use her powers to ease the mind of Logan, to bring him out of his berserker mode. The problem is that I feel like Jean Grey is not as powerful as she could have been if she had Charles Xavier in her corner. Now, this is not me saying like Magneto is a bad teacher or something. It's more of like Magneto does not truly understand how the powers of a telepath works. He only knows parts of how it works. And if she had Charles in her corner, she would have had a better chance learning how to use her powers to her full potential already. But either way, it's her being able to calm the mind down of Logan. But it took a lot of energy out of her because how crazy his mind truly is. Now, you do have Magneto walk away. And the reason why, because he has another meeting. Because they're getting another team member to join the X-Men. But now we have to jump over to New York. And when we do, we see this massive ship just float right over New York. Now remember, in the old Marvel timeline, this ship was actually used by the Celestials to collect data on Earth. But at one point in time, you had Apocalypse being able to take over the AI system on the ship and use it for his own. And so right now, that same ship is floating right over New York City. And you have Kendra say, listen, I am the herald of Apocalypse, and humans, you have been warned. The day of the fit and the strong has arrived. To basically say like, hey, you humans have shown us that you are not as strong as the mutants. And so now it's time to go. This begins the whole idea of Apocalypse ruling over North America, starting off with New York. But now we have to jump back over to Magneto. Now, when we do, it's really more of Magneto being able to meet his newest member to his X-Men team, and that would be Rogue. Now, in this reality, Rogue is still technically the adoptive daughter for Mystique, but the only difference is that in this reality, you don't have Rogue being somebody who had absorbed the powers of Carol Danvers like she did in the original timeline. In this timeline, she had absorbed the powers of Polaris. So we're kind of left to wonder, is Polaris still around in this reality? If she is, does she have any kind of power left after Rogue had basically absorbed some of her powers? And so for Rogue, it's her trying to fit in this whole brand new idea of being part of the X-Men team. And matter of fact, you have Iceman walk into the room, and Iceman is automatically attracted to Rogue, and he wants to touch her. But the problem is Rogue powers are still active, so she's scared of the idea of hurting Bobby. But it's Magneto saying, I heard of Polaris. I know her powers are very similar to mine, and so I now have the ability to show you things. Now, this also kind of builds the idea of the possibility of Rogue and Magneto possibly getting together, being that one person who can actually touch her, kiss her, and be with her. And now we have to be introduced to the Horsemen of Apocalypse as they head over to the Cape Citadel. And the reason why, because their main goal is to possibly steal a bunch of nuclear missiles for Apocalypse to use. Now, when it comes to his horsemen, you have Gideon, Kandra, War, Death, and their leader is Sabretooth. But now we jump back over to the Scarlet Witch and also Rogue. Now, it's really more of the Scarlet Witch being able to show Rogue around the base of the X-Men, but it also kind of tell Rogue, like, why Magneto is doing all of this for. The whole idea of the X-Men, the whole idea of trying his best to hopefully see a world where humans and mutants are able to live together in harmony. The whole idea of mutants being able to learn how to use their powers out in the world for the betterment of good is all because of Charles Xavier. But also for Magneto, he kind of feared that one day a very evil mutant, Apocalypse, would be able to bring in a war that would take place all over the world and could bring the end to the entire world. And so he had been waiting for the right time for his X-Men to be out in the field to fight against the forces of Apocalypse. Now, you do have Magneto confirm everything the Scarlet Witch is saying to Rogue, but then you have Magneto being confronted by Quicksilver saying, "Father, it's Apocalypse. It's his Horsemen. They have attacked a nuclear facility." And so when we jump back over to that military base, the only thing we're seeing right now is the Horsemen of Apocalypse being able to just run through all the different soldiers that were placed at this military base. Their assignment was to keep the nuclear missiles from falling into the wrong hands. And they believe with their weapons, they should be able to handle a few mutants. But now they're realizing they can't. And most likely they are going to die. And so for Magneto, he's watching all of this on his satellite feed, and he realized that it's time for his X-Men to go into action. It's time for the X-Men to try their best to handle their business, to hopefully stop the Horsemen of Apocalypse from getting their hands on those nuclear missiles. And so while you have Magneto getting the X-Men ready to leave, he tells Scarlet Witch and also Rogue to stay behind. Now the reason why, because Rogue is just a new person on the team. She's not really ready to be out in the field just yet. Now when it comes to Scarlet Witch, somebody got to stay behind with the rest of the students who are currently there at Magneto's school. And so with those two staying behind, the rest of the X-Men leave to hopefully defeat, well, the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But while they're leaving, there's somebody who's getting ready to attack the base of the X-Men, and he is known as Nemesis. But 2 hours later, you then have the X-Men arrive at the Citadel to hopefully fight against the Horsemen of Apocalypse and defeat them. But the problem is that as soon as they arrive, they're automatically attacked and blown out of the sky. And so now it's time for the X-Men to get to work to fight against the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But getting back over to the school of Magneto, we're seeing Nemesis go out of his way to attack the school. But here's the thing, because remember, for Apocalypse, it's all about survival of the fittest. The strong can live, the weak must die, the strong can lead, the weak must follow. And so for Nemesis here, he had decided that every single mutant at the school is not strong enough or have the right to live because they are weak. And so you have him go out of his way to attack the school. Now for Scarlet Witch, her main goal is to protect the students, but you have her wondering, where in the world is Rogue? Well, Rogue is battling against Nemesis at this exact moment, and for him, he got hurt by Rogue, and he hates the idea that she was able to touch him but actually hurt him as well. Now, I kind of want to jump back over to the Horsemen of Apocalypse, and here's the reason why, because they were able to get their hands on the nuclear missiles. Now, for Sabretooth being their leader, he was kind of told like, hey, your goal is to get your hands on the missiles. We are only going to hold on to them and kind of use them to kind of scare other people around us who might try to attack us. But our goal is to not really use the missiles, or really that's what he believed. But the rest of the Horsemen, they were told by Apocalypse, no, get your hands on those nuclear missiles and get ready to use them against different targets across the world. And so for Sabretooth, he's kind of like, wait a second, I did not sign up for this. But here's the thing, survival of the fittest. And so with them now kind of being scared to use the missile, they're saying, hey, you have now been labeled weak. And so now you have to die. Now, luckily for Sabretooth, the X-Men arrived. And so he was able to say, you need my help when it comes to fighting against the X-Men. There is no way that the four of y'all can handle Magneto's X-Men team. And so for the Horsemen of Apocalypse, they agreed to allow him to live just for this battle. But once the battle ends, most likely they're going to kill him off. And so, of course, the first battle would be Wolverine fighting against Sabretooth. Now, when it comes to this battle, it seems like the first time that these two characters had officially met. But on top of that, we do learn that for Apocalypse, he was going to originally recruit Wolverine, or Weapon X, but he did not. Instead, he has selected Sabretooth. But either way, you do have the two characters begin their battle here at the Citadel. And so the next few pages are really more of us kind of seeing the different types of matchups between the X-Men and also the Horsemen of Apocalypse. So we do see Jean Grey go up against Kandra. You also have Magneto go up against Gideon. Now for Gideon, he has the ability to kind of mimic Magneto's power and use it against Magneto. So it's kind of a cool matchup there between those two characters. And you have Iceman, Colossus, and Storm being able to go ahead and take care of war. Like literally in one page, you have the three characters gang up on that one member of the Horsemen of Apocalypse and take that person out in a matter of seconds. But getting back over to the battle between Wolverine and also Sabretooth, that battle is really short-lived because you do have Wolverine being the one to win against Sabretooth. Sorry, Weapon X being the one to defeat Sabretooth. It's kind of hard to remember that in this reality, it's not Wolverine, it's Weapon X. Guys, don't worry. I'll make sure in future videos I get it down correctly. But yes, Weapon X does win the battle against Sabretooth. And really, you have Magneto also being able to overpower Gideon as well by just when it comes to Gideon, he has to absorb the power someone is using and then use that power against them. But Magneto is overloading Gideon to the point where he explodes. And so there goes Gideon. In this reality, he's dead just like that. When Gideon had exploded, it did cause a huge explosion in the actual building. So you do have the rest of the X-Men kind of wondering in the possibility, did Magneto survive that explosion? Now, with Apocalypse appearing, he said, hey, you know what? Magneto is most likely dead. But on top of that, Sabretooth, you have failed me, so you got to stay here. The rest of the Horsemen, go ahead and come with me. Now, for Apocalypse, he also knows that he cannot recruit any member of the X-Men because they don't really stand with the idea of what he stands for. So he says, hey, you know what? Y'all can stay here. I know there's no point in trying to recruit y'all, but the Horsemen, we gotta go. Sabretooth, stay here. You're now technically labeled as a weakling. So right after you have Apocalypse leave with his Horsemen, you then have Magneto appear. And for Magneto, he's saying, listen, I survived the explosion, but also I'm proud of you guys because you guys were able to take down the Horsemen of Apocalypse. But don't think that this will be our last battle against Apocalypse in his madness, because honestly, there's going to be many battles down the road that we are going to have to face together as a unit. Now, the ending of the story is truly messed up because when you do have Magneto's X-Men being able to get back to the school, they kind of find out that the school has been completely wrecked by Nemesis, but also the Scarlet Witch has been killed off by Nemesis. Really, she does survive just long enough to say goodbye to Rogue and the X-Men and her father as well. So this is the ending for just X-Men Chronicles #1. It's kind of like, man, this is only the beginning of Age of Apocalypse. But with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.